When Melissa King mailed one last wedding invitation, it was supposed to be a harmless joke, a quiet way to prove she'd moved on. But when her former Marine husband stepped into the ballroom with 4 children, a world-famous CEO, and a private jet waiting outside every secret she thought was buried, came rushing back. What followed wasn't just a wedding day surprise. It was a revelation about love, forgiveness, and the families we choose. Before we begin this unforgettable journey of second chances and quiet courage, take a moment to subscribe to Soul Moment Stories. Join us for more heart-stirring tales of love, kindness, and hope that will stay with you long after the final words fade. Now settle in, and let's begin the story that changed everything. Melissa King stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her Boston penthouse, the city stretched out like a frozen ocean of glass and steel. Evening sunlight slid across the Charles River and spilled in long amber streaks onto her marble floor. She loved this view. It spoke of power, progress, and the life she had built with discipline and drive. Yet tonight, the skyline felt less like triumph and more like a question she could not quite answer. On the white oak dining table behind her lay a single ivory envelope. Its weight was hardly noticeable, but its presence pressed on the room like a storm cloud. The wedding invitations had gone out last week, hundreds of guests, society names and influential partners of Martin Kane, the real estate tycoon she would marry in less than a month. Everything had been elegant, controlled, and perfect until the moment her assistant handed her one last blank envelope and an innocent question. "Should we send one to anyone special from your past?" Melissa had laughed, then a quick dismissive sound. No, she'd said. Absolutely not. But as soon as her assistant left, she found herself holding the final envelope, her pulse flickering with an old, uninvited rhythm. Now, hours later, she still hadn't moved it. Luke Mason's name hovered in her mind like a half-remembered melody. 7 years. 7 winters since she had stood in a swirling storm of snow and tears, telling the only man she had ever truly loved that she couldn't stay. She had been 29, ambitious and furious at the universe. He had been a Marine back from deployment, scarred inside and out, and haunted by the grim diagnosis that he might never have children. They'd fought about bills and treatments, about hope and despair. And then silence. He had let her walk away without a single plea. Melissa drew a slow breath and turned from the window. Her office corner still glowed with the soft light of a Tiffany lamp. On the desk lay a stack of documents from investors and a glittering engagement ring waiting for tomorrow's board meeting. All of it represented a life she had clawed back from heartbreak. Yet her hand, when she reached for the invitation, trembled. "It's ridiculous," she told herself. "I'm marrying Martin. Luke belongs to another lifetime." But the whisper of memory was insistent, the warmth of Luke's calloused hand over hers during late-night walks, the way he built small wooden toys for children in the neighborhood, how he'd stood silently in the snow that last night, snowflakes catching on his dark hair while his eyes gray as Atlantic winter seas refused to beg. Was it pity pride? A craving to show him she had won? Melissa could not name the emotion. She only knew that the thought of him uninvited, unseen, was suddenly unbearable. She sat at the table pen poised above the thick card. Mr. Luke Mason, she wrote each stroke of ink steady, despite the pounding in her chest. The formal lines followed. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Melissa King and Martin Kane." She hesitated at cordially. The word felt brittle, like porcelain about to crack. Why am I doing this, she wondered. Her mind raced through possible outcomes. Maybe he would toss the invitation in the trash. Maybe he had moved on, married someone else. Or maybe here, her breath caught. Maybe he would come and she would see in his eyes some echo of the love they had lost. Would that heal the wound or tear it open again? She sealed the envelope quickly, as if speed might drown the doubt. But when she pressed the wax with the monogrammed K, Martin's initial, not Luke's, her fingers betrayed her. A sharp tremor spoiled the impression, leaving a faint smear across the smooth surface. A single drop of wax slid onto her skin, hot and sudden. She gasped more from the jolt of feeling than the sting. For a moment she simply stared at her thumb, the red mark bright against her pale skin. The pain felt honest in a way that her life rarely did now. Melissa rose and crossed the room, heels clicking softly against marble. She opened the tall French doors to the balcony. Boston's evening air was sharp with early winter. Below, car headlights crawled through Back Bay like strings of restless pearls. She held the envelope to her heart and closed her eyes. Images cascaded, Luke laughing in the small kitchen of their first apartment. Luke, standing stiff-backed during the final argument, saying, "I can't give you the family you deserve," the quiet dignity in his posture as she walked away. She had told herself for years that he didn't fight for her because he didn't care enough. But deep inside, she knew the truth. He had let her go because he believed she deserved more than he could give. The thought sent a shiver through her. All this time, she had carried anger like armor, yet underneath, there had been something else, something dangerously close to love still breathing. Her phone buzzed on the table, jolting her back. A message from Martin Board dinner went well. "Press loves the venue. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, beautiful." She typed a quick, "So proud of you. See you soon." It was the right response, warm and supportive, but as she set the phone down, the words felt like clothes borrowed from someone else. Inside the apartment, the invitation waited. She slipped it into the outgoing mail tray, her movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. A single act, wrapped in perfect silence. No one to witness. No one to stop her. As she turned off the lights, the city outside pulsed with cold brilliance. Somewhere to the north, in a quiet corner of Maine, she had not seen in years, the man she once loved might soon hold this envelope in his scarred hands. She wondered if he would feel the same strange tremor she did now, the thin line between pride and longing, between closure and a door left ajar. Melissa closed the door to the balcony and whispered into the dark, a confession meant for no one. "Luke, what will you do?" Behind her, the sealed envelope rested like a sleeping secret, its journey just beginning. Snow sifted across the quiet Maine coast like powdered glass, each flake catching the pale morning sun before dissolving into the frozen earth. In the small town of Camden, where lobster boats creaked against the harbor and pine trees leaned like old sentinels, Luke Mason's world unfolded with deliberate simplicity. The smell of cedar filled his workshop, a converted barn that hummed softly with the sound of a lathe shaping new life from fallen wood. Luke brushed a curl of sawdust from his sleeve and reached for a mallet. His calloused hands scarred from combat, and years of carpentry moved with a quiet assurance. Behind him came the laughter of children carried on the cold air, Mason Jr., 9 years old, hammering nails into a makeshift birdhouse. Liam, 7, spinning on the frozen ground until he fell down, laughing. Kayla and Kevin, twin 6-year-olds, chasing each other in their heavy coats. Their voices were as bright as the Maine morning, and Luke's heart tightened with a mixture of gratitude and awe. 7 years ago, he could not have imagined this life. Back then, doctors had spoken with clipped finality about nerve damage and fertility. Unlikely to conceive naturally, they had said, each word falling like a stone. The diagnosis had been more than medical. It had been a judgment he carried like an invisible weight. He had believed it meant he could never give Melissa the family she longed for. So when the envelope arrived, ivory paper edged in gold, it cut through the calm of his day like a bell. Luke found it on the workbench, where the morning mail usually piled hardware catalogs, bills, a letter from a veteran's charity. But this envelope was different, heavy, elegant. He wiped his hands on a rag heart, thrumming with a strange recognition before he even saw the name. Melissa King. For a long moment he simply stood there, the world narrowing to the single curve of her signature on the flap. Memories surged, like a tide he had long held back, the way she laughed with her whole face. The scent of rain in her hair, the night she walked away under a sky spilling snow. He remembered his own silence that night, how he had watched her go believing he was sparing her a lifetime of disappointment. Luke sat on a stool, the envelope balanced on his knee. He slid a finger beneath the seal. The card inside was formal, precise. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Melissa King and Martin Kane. Martin Kane. The name rang a distant bell from business headlines. Real estate magnate, philanthropist, the sort of man who closed deals with a signature and a smile. Luke exhaled slowly, the sound almost a laugh. So he murmured to himself, "You've done well, Mel." There was no bitterness in the words, only a quiet ache. He pictured her in Boston, confident, beautiful, the woman who once believed in his dreams, even when he could not. He imagined the life she must lead. Now glittering boardrooms, elegant dinners, a fiancé with resources to match her ambitions. But then another image rose unbidden. Melissa standing barefoot in their first apartment, paint on her cheek, teasing him about the crooked bookshelf he'd built. The warmth of that memory was sharper than any pain. Dad Mason Jr. bounded through the workshop door, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Can we use the good glue the birdhouse keeps tipping over?" Luke blinked and smiled. "Sure thing, buddy. Just don't glue your fingers together this time." The boy grinned and disappeared again. For a few moments, Luke listened to their laughter mingle with the winter wind, the sound of a life he had built, not from biology, but from love and promise. 4 children, each with a story of loss, fathers who had been Luke's brothers-in-arms mothers, who had struggled alone until fate intervened. He had met each child at a different point of crisis, and each time something inside him had simply known, this one is mine to protect. Family, he had learned, was not defined by bloodlines, but by the courage to stay. Luke turned back to the invitation. The temptation to toss it into the wood stove was brief and easy to dismiss. Not out of spite, there was none, but because he understood that avoidance was its own prison. Yet as he set the card on the bench, a calm smile found his face. He felt no need for revenge or drama. What he felt was readiness. Maybe it was time she saw who he had become. Not the broken Marine who let her walk away, but the man who had turned wounds into purpose. A soft creak behind him announced another presence. Laura Mitchell stepped into the workshop, brushing snow from her navy coat. Tall and poised with a streak of silver in her chestnut hair, Laura was more than the CEO of Hearts Over Horizons. The Veterans Children's Foundation she led with fierce compassion. She was Luke's ally, his steady partner in the work of healing. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, at her warm brown eyes scanning his face. Luke handed her the invitation without a word. She read it quickly, then looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Melissa," she said softly. "The one you told me about." He nodded. "And you're thinking of going." It wasn't a question. Luke leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed. Part of me wants to let it lie. But another part, I don't know. Maybe she needs to see that life didn't end when ours did. Maybe I need to see it too. Laura studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You don't strike me as a man chasing old flames. You strike me as someone who believes in closure." He chuckled, the sound low and rueful. Maybe closure is just another mission, and I'm still a Marine at heart. Outside, the children's laughter floated through the open door like music. Luke glanced toward the sound, his expression softening. Whatever I decide, it's not about proving anything. It's about showing what family really means. Laura's gaze followed his. Then, whatever you choose, make sure you stand in that truth. Later, after she left, Luke returned to his bench and ran his hands over the smooth grain of a half-finished rocking chair. He thought of the years spent piecing himself back together, the endless physical therapy, the therapy sessions that dug into memories of sand and smoke, the nights when loneliness echoed louder than the sea. And he thought of the mornings when small voices called Dad, and everything broken found its purpose. As dusk settled over the Maine coast, Luke placed the invitation on a high shelf above the finished toys and the old Marine Corps flag folded in a glass case. The decision to attend or not could wait until morning. For now, there was only the steady rhythm of his life, the scent of cedar, the laughter of children, and the quiet knowledge that love, real love, was measured not in DNA, but in devotion. Somewhere beyond the frozen pines and the dark Atlantic, a wedding awaited. Whether he stood in that Boston ballroom or not, Luke Mason knew one thing with the clarity of a soldier's vow: the past would no longer define the man he had become. The night deepened over Camden, Maine, with a calm that belied the storms churning inside Luke Mason. After tucking the children into bed, Kayla and Kevin curled like kittens under a quilt. Mason Jr. and Liam whispering about the birdhouse project. Luke lingered by the wood stove. The flames cast long shadows on the cedar walls of his home, stirring memories that had slept for years. Melissa's wedding invitation rested on the mantelpiece, catching firelight like a silent dare. He stared at it, and time folded back on itself until the room blurred into another winter, another life. 7 years earlier, Boston. Snowstorm warnings howled on the radio as Luke trudged up 3 flights of a worn brick apartment building, boots heavy with slush and heart heavier still. He was 30, newly discharged from the Marines, after an IED blast left scars across his ribs and the back of his left shoulder. The doctors had been blunt. He might never regain full strength in that arm, and nerve damage made natural conception unlikely. Melissa opened the door before he could knock. Her hair smelled faintly of jasmine, her cheeks flushed from pacing. The small apartment was warm with the scent of roasted chicken and rosemary. On the table lay a candlelit dinner she'd prepared, a gesture of hope. "Luke," she said, her voice quivering between relief and worry. "You're late." "I stopped at the clinic," he replied, shaking the snow from his coat. "Got the final tests." He tried to sound steady, but his throat constricted. He had rehearsed this moment on the long drive home, searching for words that would wound least. But no script could soften the truth. Melissa waited, eyes searching his. When he finally spoke, the words tasted like ash. They confirmed what we suspected. "Kids. They said it's close to impossible for me." Silence stretched. The clock ticked like a hammer. Outside, the storm thickened. Her hands trembled as she reached for him. "We can adopt. We can do treatments. We can—" "I won't put you through that." Luke interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. "You deserve a family, Melissa. A real family. Not years of false hope and hospital bills." Tears welled in her eyes, but determination flared too. "Don't decide that for me. We are a family." Luke turned away, fists clenched. Months of nightmares and survivor's guilt pressed in. Friends lost in the desert, the echo of explosions that still woke him at night. He believed he was broken in more ways than one. How could he bind her to a life of uncertainty and quiet suffering? Melissa stepped closer, her voice breaking. "Luke, I love you. That's enough." but he shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "You deserve someone whole." The argument spiraled through the night pleas from her deflections from him. Finally, when words became sobs, Melissa grabbed her coat. "Is this really what you want?" she whispered. Luke's chest burned with the urge to stop her, to pull her back, and fight for what they still had. Yet a deeper, darker voice, the soldier's voice, said this sacrifice was love. That letting her go was the only way to spare her a lifetime of regret. So he stood still. Snow whirled through the open doorway, cold and relentless. She left without looking back, tears mixing with the storm. The door clicked shut with the finality of a rifle bolt. The memory left Luke breathless. He sat back in the present, the wood stove's heat, unable to reach the chill in his chest. For years he had replayed that night, wondering whether his silence was courage or cowardice. The next months had been a blur of pain and isolation. He remembered the sterile smell of physical therapy rooms, the relentless ache of scar tissue stretching. He remembered walking the docks at dawn, when loneliness felt as sharp as the Atlantic wind. Nights bled into mornings, until a fellow veteran sergeant, Mark Lewis, invited him to volunteer at a community woodshop. Mark introduced him to a boy named Mason Jr., the son of a Marine who never returned. The boy's mother had died of cancer, leaving him adrift in the foster system. The first time Luke handed Mason a block plane and showed him how to smooth a rough edge, something inside him sparked. Purpose. Connection. One by one, the others followed. Liam, whose father was killed in action, and whose mother struggled with addiction. Kayla and Kevin, twins from a family shattered by a roadside bomb. Each child arrived with wounds that mirrored his own different scars. Same ache. Luke didn't plan to adopt them. It simply happened, like seeds taking root in ground he thought barren. The adoption process was long filled with background checks and home visits, but every challenge deepened his resolve. By the time the final papers were signed, the once empty house rang with laughter and arguments about bedtime. Against every medical prediction, he had become a father 4 times over. Luke exhaled, letting these memories settle like gentle snow. He wasn't the broken Marine who had watched Melissa vanish into the storm. He was a craftsman, a father, and though he rarely admitted it aloud, a man who had chosen love over despair. The phone buzzed on the table, a message from Kendra Lewis, Melissa's closest friend, and Mark's sister, blinked on the screen. "I heard you got the invitation. I don't know what she's thinking, but maybe she misses you more than she admits." Luke stared at the text, heart steady. He thought of Melissa's laughter, of the way she had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Perhaps she had sent the invitation out of pride, perhaps guilt, or perhaps, as Kendra hinted, something softer. He rose and walked to the window. Outside, moonlight glazed the snowbound yard where the children's footprints formed a chaotic constellation. The air smelled of pine and salt water. In the quiet, he heard echoes of another life, but they no longer carried the weight of regret. Luke touched the Marine Corps emblem tattooed on his chest, a silent pledge to the men he had served beside, and to the family he had forged. Maybe Melissa needed to see this new life. Maybe he needed to show it, not to boast or rekindle old flames, but to honor the truth that love can grow in unexpected soil. The clock struck midnight. He turned from the window, a calm determination settling over him. Tomorrow he would speak with Laura, his steadfast ally in the Hearts Over Horizons Foundation. Whatever decision he made about the wedding, it would come from strength, not longing. Luke glanced once more at the invitation, its gold edges gleaming in the firelight. 7 years of wounds and wonders lay behind him. What awaited in Boston might be unpredictable, but he felt ready. For the first time in years, he whispered her name into the quiet room. Melissa, It was not a plea, but a benediction soft, sure, and free of regret. The dawn over Camden unfurled in slow watercolor strokes, violet over the harbor, silver over the snow-dusted hills. Luke Mason rose before the sun, as he always did, his marine instincts wired to the discipline of early hours. In the hush of the kitchen, he brewed coffee and listened to the comforting rhythm of the percolator, the aroma mingling with the scent of cedar that clung to his clothes. Today felt different. The wedding invitation on the mantel still glowed faintly in his thoughts, but it no longer weighed on him like a question. Instead, it sat quietly inside him, a part of a larger story he had been living for years, one of rebuilding, loving, and quietly leading. From upstairs came the soft creak of footsteps and a small voice. Dad Kayla appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket like a tiny monarch. Her hair was a tangle of soft curls, eyes blinking awake. Luke crouched to meet her gaze. "Morning sunshine. Want some cocoa?" She nodded, climbing into his arms without hesitation. The simple trust of that gesture still startled him. Sometimes the way these children who had lost so much leaned on him as if he'd been there since their first heartbeat. By 7, the house was alive with the chatter of breakfast. Mason Jr. debated with Liam over who could build the sturdiest birdhouse. Kevin poured maple syrup with the concentration of a surgeon. Luke watched them with quiet pride. These were the mornings that defined him far more than any medal or deployment ever could. After the kids left for school, Luke pulled on his worn green marine jacket and stepped into the crisp air. Across the yard stood the heart of his new life. Mason Woodworks, the small carpentry studio he had built from the skeleton of an old dairy barn. Inside, shafts of winter light fell across planks of maple and oak stacked neatly along the walls. Each piece of furniture he created, chairs, cribs, rocking horses, was a small testament to patience and craft, a slow undoing of the chaos he'd once carried in his body. It was here, among the scent of sawdust and the steady rhythm of hand tools, that his transformation had taken root. Physical therapy had rebuilt his strength, but it was the work of shaping wood and shaping lives that healed the deeper wounds. The shop also served as a gathering place for local veterans. Every Thursday evening, men and women who had worn the uniform came to drink coffee, share stories, and sometimes simply sit in silence. Luke seldom spoke of his own scars, unless it was to help another vet feel less alone. Over time, people began to look to him for quiet guidance. He never called himself a leader. He just showed up every day without fail. But word traveled. It was through these gatherings that Luke met Laura Mitchell, CEO of Hearts Over Horizons, a foundation dedicated to children who had lost parents in military service. Laura was in her early 40s, tall and striking with chestnut hair, streaked by silver, that only amplified her dignity. She had started the foundation after losing her own brother in Afghanistan. When she visited the woodshop for the first time, she found Luke patiently teaching Mason Jr. how to plane a board. "You built all this?" she'd asked, running her hand over a polished oak table. Luke had shrugged, piece by piece. "It's how I stay grounded." What began as professional curiosity quickly became partnership. Laura saw in Luke not just skill, but mission. With her encouragement, he began leading weekend programs for children of fallen soldiers, teaching them woodworking, hiking, and the simple art of trust. Over coffee one evening, she said, "You know, Luke, you're more than a craftsman. You're proof that healing can build something stronger than what was broken." He had smiled at the compliment, though a part of him still flinched from praise. "I just do what I can," he replied. Laura shook her head gently. "No, you do what most people can't. You show up and stay. That's heroism whether you name it or not." That word hero sat uneasily with him. Combat had taught him to distrust such labels. Yet as months turned into years, Luke came to see heroism in a new light, not in grand gestures or medals, but in consistent acts of love. Reading bedtime stories to children who once woke screaming, coaching a teenager through panic attacks, standing in the cold with a grieving widow until the stars began to fade. By the third year of his work with Hearts Over Horizons, the Foundation's board formally invited Luke to become a program partner. He hesitated unused to titles, but Laura persisted. "This isn't about recognition," she told him. "It's about multiplying the quiet good you already do." So he agreed, and Mason Woodworks became an unofficial headquarters for hope. His life, once defined by battlefields, now revolved around birthday parties, community fundraisers, and the laughter of children sanding pine blocks smooth. This new identity did not erase the past. On certain winter nights, the smell of diesel could still pull him back to desert convoys, to the deafening boom that ended one life and nearly ended his. But those memories had softened, framed now by the resilience that followed. Late that afternoon, Laura arrived unannounced, her coat dusted with snow. She carried a thermos, and that unshakable calm Luke had come to trust. "I was in town," she said, handing him a mug of tea. "Thought I'd check on my favorite woodshop general." Luke chuckled. Promotions without paperwork, I could get used to that. They sat on a bench, he'd just finished steam rising from their cups. The conversation wandered about upcoming charity drives, about a child they'd recently helped find a foster home. But inevitably, Laura's eyes drifted to the wedding invitation pinned discreetly on the bulletin board. "You've decided?" she asked. "Not yet," Luke admitted. "But I keep thinking, maybe showing up isn't about the past at all. Maybe it's about the truth I'm living now." Laura's gaze softened. "Then go as the man you are not the man you were. And if you go, don't go alone. Bring your children. Bring the life you've built. Let her see the full story." The suggestion settled in Luke's chest like a spark waiting to catch. As evening fell, he walked her to her car. The sky blazed with the first stars, sharp against the winter blue. He looked back at the glowing windows of the house, where 4 small silhouettes played shadow games on the curtains. This was the quiet triumph he wanted the world to witness, not to boast, not to reclaim a lost love, but to stand in the light of what love had made possible after so much loss. Inside, as he closed the door against the cold, Luke touched the Marine Corps tattoo over his heart, feeling the steady beat beneath it. The past was a scar he no longer hid. The future, whatever it held, including a wedding in Boston, would meet him as he was, a father, a craftsman, a quiet hero who had already won the battles that truly mattered. The next morning broke with a pale sun over Camden, its light spilling across frost-rimmed roofs and the frozen harbor. Luke Mason stood on the porch, with a mug of black coffee breathing in the crisp scent of salt and pine. Inside, the sound of small feet and cereal bowls carried the music of ordinary happiness. Today he felt the tension of a choice ripening inside him. The wedding invitation sat where he'd left it on the mantel, quiet and patient, as though waiting for him to admit what he already knew. He would have to decide whether to face the past in Boston. By mid-morning, the children were bundled off to school, their laughter fading down the drive. Luke cleaned the breakfast table and moved to his workshop, seeking the grounding rhythm of wood and tools. He had just set a maple plank on the sawhorses when the crunch of tires on snow caught his ear. Laura Mitchell stepped out of a silver SUV, brushing snowflakes from her dark navy coat. Her chestnut hair threaded with elegant silver framed a face that carried both strength and warmth. She walked toward him with a purposeful stride, a leather folio tucked under one arm. "You were hard to catch," she said, offering a smile. "I thought you might hide behind a dozen projects today." Luke grinned faintly. I tried. You're better than the mailman. She returned the grin and followed him inside, where the scent of fresh-cut cedar filled the air. Luke poured coffee for her, and they sat on a long oak bench he'd finished the day before. Outside, sunlight pooled across the snowy yard like a slow-moving river. Laura set her folio on the bench, but didn't open it. Instead, she looked directly at him. I heard about the invitation. Luke's eyebrows rose. Kendra. She called last night, Laura admitted. She was worried you'd either burn it or ignore it. Luke traced the rim of his coffee mug with one finger. I thought about both, but the longer it sits there, the more I feel. It isn't about revenge or reopening wounds. It might be about something bigger. Laura tilted her head. Closure. Maybe. Or a way of showing that what we built here, the kids, the woodshop, Hearts Over Horizons, isn't a second-best life. It's the life I was meant to find. Laura considered that her eyes reflecting the morning light. Then maybe showing up is an act of gratitude, not defiance. Luke let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Still, Boston isn't just a drive away. And 4 kids on a long road trip in winter that she interrupted with a soft smile is why I'm here. She opened her folio to reveal a glossy photo of a sleek white private jet with the Foundation's emblem on its tail. Hearts Over Horizons keeps this aircraft for rapid relief missions and cross-country fundraising events. It's at our disposal next week. I can have it here in Camden the morning of the wedding. Luke blinked, startled. Laura, that's too much. I can't let the Foundation pay for my personal. This isn't just personal, she said gently. You are part of our mission. You've helped heal children who thought life was over. This trip is about showing the world what healing looks like. If you choose to go, you go as the man and father. You've become one who inspires others. He tried to protest, but she reached across the bench and rested a hand on his arm. The gesture was steady, almost formal, yet carried a quiet intimacy. Luke, I've watched you turn pain into purpose. If you want to stand in front of the woman who once loved you and simply be that man, then we, your community, should stand with you. The workshop fell silent, except for the ticking of the wood stove. Luke studied her face, the calm conviction in her eyes. He thought of the children's giggles echoing through the house of the soldiers' widows who'd found solace in Hearts Over Horizons, of the countless times Laura's leadership had made impossible projects possible. You really think it's the right thing, he asked. I think it's your thing, she replied. And you've never run from the hard missions. Why start now? Her words unlocked a memory standing in a desert outpost, as a young Marine waiting for orders, heart-pounding but steady. Missions weren't about comfort. They were about purpose. Luke looked toward the wide shop windows. Beyond them, the Atlantic stretched cold and endless, a reminder that some journeys were meant to be crossed no matter the distance. He exhaled. If I go, the kids go too. I want Melissa to see the family we've built, not to prove anything. Just to honor it. Laura's smile widened, luminous and sure. Then we'll make it happen. I'll handle flight logistics. We can even involve the Foundation's media team if you're comfortable. No headlines, just quiet documentation of what love and resilience can create. He chuckled softly. You think of everything. That's my job, she said. Yours is to keep sanding those rocking chairs and telling bedtime stories. For the next hour, they planned the essential school permissions, travel bags arrangements for the workshop. Laura's calm efficiency turned what had seemed impossible into something almost natural. At times, Luke caught himself watching the gentle authority with which she organized details, and he felt a stir of gratitude that went deeper than friendship. When they finally rose from the bench, Laura closed her folio and looked at him with a rare softness. Luke, this isn't just about the wedding. It's about the story you'll carry forward about love that chooses to stay even when bloodlines don't match. Let her see it. Let the world see it. He nodded, a slow certainty settling into his bones. We'll go. Outside, the late morning sun had warmed the air enough to release the scent of pine. Laura paused by her SUV. I'll call the pilot tonight, she said. And Luke, thank you for letting me be part of this. He met her eyes, his voice quiet. I couldn't imagine doing it without you. She gave a small, almost shy smile before driving off, leaving a trail of sparkling tire marks on the snow. Luke watched until the vehicle disappeared, then turned back toward the house. Inside, the mantel gleamed with the wedding invitation like a silent witness. For the first time since opening it, he felt no unease. Instead, he felt the steady hum of readiness, the Marine's calm before a mission, but transformed by love and fatherhood. That evening, as he read a bedtime story to the twins and listened to Mason Jr. and Liam argue good-naturedly over which pajamas were luckier, he sensed the shape of the journey ahead. They would board a private jet, not as a spectacle, but as a living testament that family is forged in commitment, that healing can outshine heartbreak. When the house finally settled into silence, Luke stood by the window. The sky glittered with 1,000 cold stars. He placed a hand over the Marine Corps tattoo on his chest and whispered a quiet vow, half to himself, half to the life he had built. We go as we are. Whole. The night before their planned departure, a sharp wind swept in from the Atlantic, rattling shutters and scouring Camden's narrow streets. Luke Mason stood on the porch of his farmhouse, turned home, a lantern in one hand, scanning the heavy clouds that pressed low against the moon. The air smelled of salt and iron, a storm smell he knew by instinct from years of Marine deployments. Behind him, muffled laughter drifted from the living room. Mason Jr. and Liam were building a jet simulator from couch cushions, while Kayla and Kevin squealed in delight each time a cushion turbulence sent them rolling. Their excitement over the coming trip to Boston had reached a fever pitch. Yet beneath their giggles, Luke heard the faint whistle of rising wind and felt the subtle pressure change that signals trouble. The weather report confirmed his worry, a nor'easter gathering strength off the coast forecast to slam New England by morning. Flights were already being delayed from Portland to Boston. Luke tightened his coat and called Laura Mitchell. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady, even as static crackled over the line. I just got the same update, she said. The private jet is on standby in Portland, but the airfield is warning of possible closures if the storm shifts west. Luke paced the porch boots, crunching on thin ice. I don't want to risk the kids' safety. We can postpone, Laura. Interrupted, calm, but resolute. Let's not decide yet. Our pilot has flown through worse. He suggests an early morning window before the heaviest snow. I'll drive up tonight to be ready. If conditions change, we'll call it off. No heroics. A reluctant smile touched Luke's lips. You know I've had enough of heroics to last a lifetime. Exactly, she said. This is about wisdom, not bravado. I'll text when I'm on the road. When he hung up, Luke found the children crowded at the window, eyes wide at the swirling snow. Dad, is the flight canceled? Mason Jr. asked, his 9-year-old voice, trying to sound casual, but betraying a tremor. Luke crouched to meet their eyes, the old Marine calm flowing back like muscle memory. Maybe delayed, maybe not. What matters is we stay ready and safe. Remember what I taught you about missions that we adapt, Liam said promptly, his small chest swelling with pride. Luke grinned and ruffled the boy's hair. Exactly. Marines adapt. Families, too. The reassurance worked its quiet magic. Soon the kids returned to their game, turning the storm outside into part of their adventure. Later, after tucking them into bed, Luke sat by the wood stove. The invitation balanced on his knee, like a silent compass. He let the room's warmth seep into him and allowed old memories to surface. Memories of desert sandstorms that came without warning, missions diverted, and men saved by the calm of quick thinking. He remembered the night he and Melissa last spoke, how he believed walking away was an act of love. Now he wondered if showing up tomorrow might be another kind of love, one born not from sacrifice, but from courage to be fully seen. A buzz from his phone cut through the reflection. A text from Kendra Lewis, Melissa's lifelong friend, and the quiet bridge between their worlds. Luke, I don't know if I should say this, but Melissa wasn't just being proud when she sent that invitation. She still talks about you sometimes. She wonders if you ever forgave her or yourself. Luke read the message twice, his heartbeat deep and even. He didn't know what Melissa expected from his presence, but Kendra's words confirmed what he had sensed. This was more than a social courtesy or a cruel joke. It was a reach across time, an opening for truth. He typed a brief reply. Thank you for telling me. Whatever happens tomorrow, I wish her peace. Sliding the phone aside, Luke felt a subtle shift inside him. He wasn't going to Boston to rekindle a romance. He was going to honor what they had once been, and to show that love's deepest form is sometimes release. Just after midnight, headlights swept the driveway. Laura Mitchell stepped out of her SUV, her coat flecked with ice crystals. Despite the long drive and worsening weather, she carried herself with the composed energy of someone who thrives in a storm. "You're sure about this?" Luke asked, as he helped her carry an overnight bag inside. Laura brushed melting snow from her scarf. "I trust our pilot, and I trust you. We'll recheck conditions at 4 a.m. if there's the slightest risk we stay grounded. But right now, that early window still looks good." Her calm steadied him more than the fire's warmth. They sat at the kitchen table with steaming mugs of coffee, discussing alternate plans, delaying the trip a day driving if necessary. Luke found himself grateful not only for her competence, but for the quiet companionship she offered, a presence that asked nothing, yet gave much. "You know," Laura said after a reflective pause, "whether you make it to Boston or not, you've already kept the promise to show Melissa the man you've become. The fact that you even considered this journey says everything about who you are." Luke met her gaze. "It's strange. For years I thought strength meant staying silent. Now I see it can mean showing up, even if only to say goodbye well." A soft smile lit her face. That's the kind of strength children and whole communities learn from. They talked until the storm's howl softened to a steady hiss. Around 2 a.m., Luke checked on the kids, each sleeping deeply, trust written across their small faces. He returned to the kitchen to find Laura dozing lightly in a chair, her head tilted in quiet grace. For a moment, he simply watched, a gentle gratitude swelling in his chest. The alarm rang at 4:00 a.m. Outside, the storm had eased to a light flurry. The sky above the harbor showed the faintest streak of indigo, promising a brief calm before the next front. Their pilot confirmed by phone a narrow but safe window to fly if they departed within 2 hours. Luke woke the children, who responded with sleepy excitement. They dressed in layers, while Laura organized travel bags with practiced efficiency. By the time the SUV rolled onto the plowed road, the first blush of dawn had touched the frozen trees. As they drove toward Portland's small airfield, Luke felt a calm resolve settle over him. This wasn't the nervous anticipation of combat missions or the hesitant hope of a romantic reunion. It was something steadier, the peace of a man walking fully into his present, carrying both the love of those beside him and the truth of the life he had built. When the runway lights finally came into view, gleaming through thinning snow, the children cheered. Laura turned to Luke and said quietly, "This is your mission, your way." Luke squeezed her hand, grateful for her steadiness. And our flight," he added. The private jet stood ready on the tarmac, white as the morning sky, a symbol not of luxury, but of a journey defined by choice and grace. As Luke led his children toward the plane, the invitation in his pocket felt less like a summons to the past, and more like a bridge to the life he had claimed. Whatever waited in Boston, old love, new understanding, or simply closure, he knew he would meet it as the man he had become, a father, a builder of hope, and a quiet hero who carried storms with unshaken calm. The sky above Boston was a clean, icy blue when the private jet from Portland broke through a band of thin morning clouds. Sunlight glinted off the silver fuselage, as if the plane itself carried a quiet sense of purpose. Inside, Luke Mason sat by the window, his broad shoulders relaxed, yet alert, the steady center of a mission he had chosen for reasons deeper than anyone on the ground could guess. Kayla had fallen asleep against his arm, clutching the small wooden dollhouse he'd made for her. Mason Jr. and Liam were peering out the opposite window, naming shapes in the clouds, while Kevin hummed a tune only he could hear. Across the aisle, Laura Mitchell caught Luke's glance and smiled a calm, steady smile that had anchored him through storm and doubt. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. Mason, Ms. Mitchell, we'll begin our descent into Boston Logan in 5 minutes. Temperature on the ground is 29 degrees. Skies clear." Luke nodded his thanks and turned to the children. "Okay, team. Seat belts. Mission landing in 5. The kids giggled and obeyed, the excitement of the adventure washing away any lingering sleepiness. Luke checked their belts with the same care he'd once given to squad gear before a patrol. Old habits repurposed for fatherhood. As the jet tilted gently into its approach, the city unfurled beneath them, rows of brownstones dusted with snow, the glittering ribbon of the Charles River Church, steeples catching the sun. Luke's chest tightened with memories. Somewhere below lay the apartment where he and Melissa had once shared laughter and late-night dreams. 7 years had passed, but the streets still formed the map of their first love. Laura leaned toward him. "How do you feel?" Luke exhaled slowly, steady, ready. He touched the Marine Corps tattoo beneath his shirt, a quiet gesture of resolve. "This isn't about looking back. It's about showing what love built in the present." Laura nodded, her eyes warm. "Then that's exactly what people will see." On the ground, the airport stirred with ordinary bustle until the jet rolled onto the private terminal's apron. Then, a ripple of attention spread. Ground crew paused mid-task, surprised by the elegant aircraft, marked with the Hearts Over Horizons emblem. 2 photographers from the local paper, tipped off by the Foundation's quiet press advisory, trained their lenses as the stairs descended. Luke stepped out first. He wore a dark charcoal suit beneath his worn marine green coat, polished boots catching the sunlight. The winter air cut crisp against his face, but he stood straight and unhurried. Behind him, Laura emerged in a tailored navy coat, her presence both gracious and commanding. The children followed in single file, Mason Jr. carrying the birdhouse like a trophy, Liam with a backpack full of wooden toys, Kayla and Kevin holding hands. The sight of them bright-eyed and confident brought an audible murmur from the small cluster of onlookers. A veteran with 4 adopted children and a philanthropic CEO arriving together. This was not the typical wedding party arrival Boston's high society expected on a Friday morning. "Dad, look," Liam pointed to the skyline where church spires gleamed. "It's like the pictures you showed us." Luke smiled, kneeling to eye level. "That's where Mom and I used to walk. Today we make new memories." Laura touched his elbow gently. "Car's ready." Shall we? 2 black SUVs waited at the edge of the tarmac, drivers holding doors open in quiet deference. As they settled inside, Luke noticed the polite curiosity of airport staff, no gawking, just respectful nods. It wasn't fame they saw, but something rarer, a man whose quiet dignity invited admiration without asking for it. The drive into Boston wound along the Charles, where skaters traced slow circles on frozen lagoons, and college towers pierced the cold air. The children pressed their faces to the windows, their excitement a bright counterpoint to Luke's measured calm. Laura glanced at him. The wedding venue is the historic Kingsley Hotel downtown. Melissa booked the grand ballroom. I confirmed our arrival with the concierge. As a simple foundation visit, no one inside knows the full story. Luke gave a small smile. Good. I'm not here to make headlines. Yet as the SUV entered the city proper, he could already feel the invisible ripple of their presence. Text messages were surely flying between guests. Photographers had a way of moving news at light speed. He pictured Melissa somewhere inside that grand hotel, perhaps sipping coffee, unaware of how quickly the day's script was about to change. When the convoy finally turned onto Beacon Street, the Kingsley rose like a marble ship against the winter sky. Tall columns, glittering windows. Red carpet already unfurled for Boston's elite. Rows of luxury cars lined the entrance. The scene might have felt intimidating once. Today it only clarified Luke's purpose. He helped the children out of the SUV, adjusting Kayla's scarf and checking Mason Jr.'s carefully crafted birdhouse. Guests milling near the entrance slowed their conversations to watch. Some recognized the Hearts Over Horizons emblem on Laura's coat. Others simply sensed that something different had arrived. A doorman in formal livery stepped forward, momentarily speechless, as he took in the sight of Luke's quiet, commanding figure and the 4 children standing neatly beside him. Laura offered a gracious nod. "Good morning. We're here for the King Kane wedding." Of course, Ms. Mitchell, the doorman, replied, after a beat, his tone now tinged with respect. "Welcome." Inside, the hotel lobby shimmered with winter flowers and crystal chandeliers. Warm air carried the scent of roses and polished wood. Luke felt the children instinctively draw closer, but he gave them an encouraging smile. "Remember," he said softly, "we walk proud and gentle. We're here as family." Meanwhile, on the 3rd floor of the Kingsley, Melissa King adjusted the fall of her ivory silk gown in a full-length mirror. Around her bustled a cloud of bridesmaids and stylists. The day she had planned for months had begun with quiet perfection. Flawless makeup and early toast with Kendra Lewis, a brief phone call from Martin Kane confirming last-minute logistics. Yet a thin thread of unease wound through her chest, impossible to explain. Kendra noticed. "You're pale," she said gently. "Cold feet," Melissa forced a laugh, maybe just too much coffee. But as she glanced at her reflection at the confident businesswoman dressed as a bride, her mind flicked unbidden to the envelope she had sent weeks ago. Luke, was he out there somewhere working in his main workshop, the invitation tossed aside? Or her heart skipped, was he closer than she dared imagine? A sudden chime from her phone interrupted the thought. A message from a cousin waiting in the lobby. "Melissa, you need to see this. A private jet just arrived. It's Luke with 4 children and a woman who looks like a CEO." The room tilted for an instant. Melissa's breath caught the bustle of attendants fading to a distant hum. Against her will, an image formed. Luke stepping into the hotel, with the quiet strength she remembered, children around him, like living proof of a life rich and whole. Downstairs, the lobby had fallen into an expectant hush as Luke and his small entourage crossed the marble floor toward the grand ballroom. Guests whispered, "Is that Melissa's ex-husband? 4 children are they his? And who's the elegant woman with him?" Luke heard the murmurs, but kept his stride, even his marine, calm, unshaken. He felt no need to announce or explain. His presence and the laughter of the children at his side spoke louder than any introduction. Laura leaned close and said quietly, "Whatever happens next, you've already told your story." Luke nodded, eyes steady on the ornate double doors ahead. Beyond them, lay a room filled with Melissa's carefully arranged future, and the next chapter of a past neither of them had ever fully left behind. The double doors of the Kingsley Hotel's grand ballroom swung open with a slow, deliberate grace, as though even the hinges sensed that something unexpected was entering. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Music from the string quartet dwindled to a trembling note and fell silent. For an instant, the only sound was the muffled thud of the doors settling back into place. Luke Mason stepped forward, his marine green coat draped neatly over a dark charcoal suit. Snowflakes still clung to the shoulders, sparkling like quiet metals. At his side, Mason Jr., Liam, Kayla, and Kevin moved with calm assurance, each child holding a small token of their shared life: a carved birdhouse, a wooden toy, truck, a dollhouse no bigger than a teacup, and a hand-painted sign that simply read, "Family." Behind them, Laura Mitchell entered in a navy coat that caught the chandelier light like a midnight sea, her posture elegant and composed. The room itself was a study in opulence. Crystal chandeliers sent rivers of light across marble floors. Round tables bloomed with white roses and silver cutlery. A string quartet sat frozen bows midair, as if waiting for permission to breathe. Politicians, financiers, and society figures. Boston's polished elite filled the hall, their murmurs rising and falling in a ripple of disbelief. Whispers darted like quick birds. Is that Luke Mason or children? Are they all his? And who is the woman beside him? Is that Laura Mitchell from Hearts Over Horizons? At the far end of the room, beneath an archway of white lilies, Melissa King turned from her bridesmaids and locked eyes with the man she once thought she'd never see again. Time seemed to compress into a single heartbeat. She registered every detail: the silver at Luke's temples that hadn't been there before, the calm strength in his stance, the quiet pride in the children's faces. 7 years of absence collapsed, replaced by a recognition so immediate it stole her breath. Beside Melissa, Martin Kane stiffened. The real estate magnate had built a reputation on unflappable charm, but now a flicker of uncertainty crossed his sculpted features. He'd heard fragments of Luke Mason's name, an ex-husband, a Marine. But Melissa had always dismissed those conversations as irrelevant. Yet the sight of this man, accompanied by a celebrated CEO and 4 bright-eyed children, was anything but irrelevant. Martin's jaw tightened as he studied the newcomer, who seemed to carry the gravity of a whole new world. Kendra Lewis, Melissa's oldest friend and confidant, sensed the storm instantly. She slipped closer, her whisper urgent. "Melissa, did you know he was coming like this?" Melissa's voice caught. "I invited him, but not." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Not like this. Not with a private jet and a living testament to a life he had built from courage and grace. The silence thickened until Luke broke it. Not with words, but with a simple gesture. He placed a hand gently on Kayla's shoulder and guided the children toward the edge of the ballroom, moving with the quiet confidence of a soldier who neither demands nor defers. Laura walked beside him, offering only a serene nod to those who stared. Every step drew fresh whispers. "He looks remarkable. Those kids, are they adopted? That woman is definitely Laura Mitchell." "What is going on?" near the center aisle. Martin Kane finally found his voice. "Can I help you?" The question was civil, but edged with the authority of a man accustomed to control. Luke stopped, meeting Martin's gaze with calm steadiness. "I believe Melissa invited me," he said, his tone respectful, yet unmistakably firm. "I came to offer my congratulations and to introduce the family I've been blessed to raise." The quiet confidence in those words carried through the room like a bell. No boast, no challenge, simply truth. Martin's eyes flicked to the children, then back to Luke. "You've built quite a family." Luke inclined his head slightly. Family isn't always blood. It's love, and the courage to stand by it. A murmur of appreciation swept through the guests, many of them veterans of their own private battles with loss and renewal. Melissa felt her heart tighten at Luke's words. He wasn't there to reclaim or accuse. He was there to be seen, to let the life he'd forged speak for itself. Something inside her wound, tight for years, began to uncoil. Kendra gently touched Melissa's arm. "Do you want to speak to him?" Melissa nodded, her movements slow, deliberate. She stepped forward, silk gown whispering across the marble floor, until she stood only a few feet away from the man she had once called husband. "Luke," she said softly, the name trembling in the air like a long-lost song. "Melissa," he replied, his eyes warm but steady. "You look radiant." A breathless laugh escaped her, half joy, half disbelief. "I didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't," he admitted. "But then I realized some invitations are more than formality. Some are bridges." The room held its breath. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim to listen. Melissa's vision blurred as memories crowded in, nights spent waiting for him to return from deployment, the quiet despair of their final argument, the blizzard that swallowed her as she walked away. For years she had told herself he let her leave because he didn't care enough. Now, seeing him surrounded by the children he had chosen, she understood the truth. His silence had been sacrifice, not neglect. "You built a beautiful family," she whispered. Luke glanced at the children, each standing proudly. "They built me," he said simply. "Their fathers were brothers to me in uniform. When life asked who would stand for them, I couldn't say no. Family is a choice we make every day." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Even Martin shifted slightly, the edges of his pride confronted by a kind of devotion he had never imagined. The wedding planner, pale and nervous, approached Martin for direction. But Martin raised a quiet hand, eyes never leaving Luke. There was something in the veteran's presence, an unshakable dignity, that made hasty words feel small. Melissa turned to Martin, her own voice gentler now. "Martin, I need a moment with Luke." Martin hesitated. He had spent his life negotiating skyscraper deals and political donations, but this was different. He studied Luke again, saw no aggression, only profound steadiness. At last, he nodded, once curt, but not unkind. The guest sensed the gravity of the moment and parted, like water, giving the former couple a small circle of privacy amid the grandeur. For several heartbeats, Melissa and Luke simply looked at each other. The years of absence seemed to peel away, revealing two people forever marked by love and loss, but not destroyed by either. "I thought you'd moved on completely," Melissa said finally. "I have moved forward," Luke replied. "But that's different from forgetting. You were my beginning, Melissa, and beginnings deserve honor, not erasure." Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but words failed. Instead, she reached out, fingers trembling, and touched the sleeve of his coat. It was the first time she had touched him in 7 years, and the warmth of it felt like the closing of a long, cold circle. Behind them, the children waited quietly, sensing the sacredness of the moment. Laura stood a respectful step back, her expression one of quiet support, as if she too recognized that something larger than a wedding was unfolding. Across the room, Martin Kane inhaled deeply, his pride and curiosity colliding. He had built skyscrapers and reshaped neighborhoods, yet he had never stood in the presence of a man whose mere steadiness could alter the atmosphere of a ballroom. For the first time in years, he felt the fragile difference between wealth and worth. The string quartet, still holding their bows mid-air, exchanged glances as if unsure whether to resume. But no one moved, because everyone in the Kingsley Hotel understood that something unforgettable was being written. In that pause, the quiet re-meeting of two lives, and the unmistakable truth that love, real love, changes form but never truly dies. For a long heartbeat, the Kingsley Hotel's grand ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The chandeliers shimmered, but gave no sound. Hundreds of wedding guests stood motionless, their whispers silenced by a tension that felt almost sacred. At the center of it all, Melissa King faced Luke Mason, the man she once loved, and had let go, while Martin Kane, her fiancé, watched with a measured but unsettled gaze. Luke broke the silence first. He stepped a little closer, his posture neither defensive nor meek, but calm and deliberate. The children instinctively formed a gentle half-circle behind him, their small faces lifted toward the woman in the wedding gown. "Melissa," he said, his voice carrying across the marble hall with quiet authority, "I came because your invitation felt like more than a formality. I wanted you to know the truth of my life, what came after the night we said goodbye." Melissa's breath caught. She had prepared for bouquets and champagne toasts, not for a testimony of love reborn in another form. "The truth," she echoed barely above a whisper. Luke nodded. "7 years ago when we parted, I believed I had nothing to offer you. My body was broken, and the doctor said children would likely never be part of my future. I thought letting you go was an act of love, that you deserved a life without the weight of my limitations." The guests shifted some pressing hands to their hearts. Even Martin's expression softened curiosity overriding pride. Luke's eyes swept the room before returning to Melissa. "But life had a different mission for me, one I didn't see at first." He turned slightly and placed a reassuring hand on Mason Jr.'s shoulder. "After discharge, I found purpose in unexpected places. Mason's father was my brother in arms. When he didn't come home, I couldn't stand by while his son drifted through the foster system. Then came Liam, whose father was killed in action and whose mother couldn't cope. Kayla and Kevin lost both parents in a single roadside bomb attack. One by one, they found their way to me. The children stood proud beneath his touch. Their quiet dignity seemed to brighten the entire ballroom. I never planned to be a father," Luke continued, his voice deepening with emotion. "But the moment each of these kids came into my life, I knew I had been wrong about what family means. It isn't just biology. It's love and courage, the choice to stay every single day." A ripple of silence moved through the crowd. Women dabbed at tears. Men nodded unconsciously, as if saluting an unseen flag. The string quartet's bows remained suspended, unwilling to break the spell. Melissa's vision blurred. She remembered every agonizing conversation from years ago, his insistence that she deserved a real family, his refusal to fight for himself. Now the truth settled in her chest like a warm light. He had never stopped believing in family. He had simply redefined it. I thought you let me go because you didn't care enough to try," she said, voice trembling. Luke shook his head slowly. "I let you go because I cared too much to chain you to what I thought was broken. I was wrong about myself, and I was wrong not to trust you to choose love over circumstance." The weight of those words drew a collective breath from the guests. Even Martin Kane, whose fortune and reputation rested on controlling every narrative, found himself humbled. Here was a man who admitted failure not as weakness, but as a prelude to grace. Melissa took a small step forward, silk hem whispering across marble. "Luke." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "All these years I've carried a part of that night inside me. Anger, yes, but also grief. Hearing this, it changes everything." Luke offered a gentle, almost wistful smile. "That night shaped us both, but it doesn't have to define who we are now." Martin cleared his throat, finally breaking his silence. "I didn't know any of this," he said. His baritone steady but softer than usual. He looked at Melissa, then at Luke. "It seems I've been standing next to a story much deeper than I understood." The admission was neither accusation nor surrender. It was something rarer, respect. Martin, who had built skyscrapers and negotiated billion-dollar deals, now confronted a truth no contract could bind, that the worth of a life cannot be measured in net assets or prestige. Luke inclined his head slightly toward him. I came to honor Melissa's future, not to disrupt it. My story isn't meant to compete with yours. Something eased in Martin's posture. For the first time all evening, his eyes softened less as a rival and more as a man witnessing a different kind of strength. Kendra Lewis. Ever the quiet bridge stepped forward and addressed the room. Perhaps this is the real gift of today, she said gently. To remember that love isn't a straight line. It's a series of choices, some painful, some redemptive, that reveal who we really are. Her words seemed to lift a collective burden. Guests exhaled the tension, shifting toward something like reverence. The string quartet lowered their bows, but still held silence, as if any note would feel too small. Melissa wiped a tear and looked again at Luke. You've given those children a miracle, and you've given me one too, understanding. Luke's expression softened into something like quiet triumph. That's all I hoped for, to be seen, to let the life I've built bear witness to what love can become. The children stepped closer. Mason Jr. offered Melissa the birdhouse he had carried all morning. Dad says families build homes from love, he said shyly. This is for you. Melissa knelt, her gown pooling around her, and accepted the gift with tears bright as crystal. It's beautiful, she whispered. Just like all of you. In that moment, the grandeur of the ballroom faded. The chandeliers, the silver cutlery, the perfectly scripted schedule, all of it receded behind something more profound. The simple, unvarnished power of truth. Martin looked at Melissa with new eyes, as if weighing not a merger, but a mystery. You don't owe me an answer right now, he said quietly. But I can see that today is about more than a wedding. It's about honesty, and I respect that. Melissa reached for his hand, gratitude softening her features. Thank you, Martin. Your kindness means more than you know. Luke stepped back, sensing the moment needed no further words. Yet he offered one final thought, his voice carrying the quiet strength of a Marine's vow. Family isn't about what we lose. It's about what we choose to give. That's the only legacy worth leaving. The ballroom held a heartbeat of silence. Then something unexpected happened. Guests began to applaud. It was not the polite clapping of a social function, but the deep, resonant applause of hearts moved and humbled. The sound swelled until even the chandeliers seemed to vibrate with it. Melissa closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. When she opened them again, she met Luke's steady gaze and whispered words that only he could hear. Thank you for coming home in your own way. Luke nodded a quiet benediction. Whatever happened next, whether the wedding proceeded, paused, or transformed, the truth had been spoken. And truth, once unveiled, never fades. The ballroom of the Kingsley Hotel felt transformed after Luke's quiet testimony. The chandeliers still shone with crystalline brilliance, but their light now seemed softer, as though it reflected something deeper than mere luxury. The applause that had swelled and slowly subsided left behind a hush that was warm instead of tense. Conversations that resumed did so in low, reverent tones. Even the string quartet set down their bows, aware that any music might seem small compared to what had just been spoken. Melissa King stood at the center of it all, her silk gown catching the light like frozen moonlight. She had never looked more regal or more vulnerable. Beside her, Martin Kane remained composed, but thoughtful, his posture less that of a magnate, and more of a man caught in the presence of something he could not purchase or control. Luke Mason waited a respectful distance away, his children close, but calm, their bright eyes fixed on the woman in white. He had said what he came to say. He felt no urge to move forward or back. Like the tide after a storm, he stood in the quiet knowledge that nothing essential remained hidden. Melissa stepped toward him, every motion deliberate. The delicate train of her gown trailed across the marble like a soft whisper. When she reached Luke, she looked up into eyes she had not seen in 7 years, and found them unchanged, in essence, still steady as the Atlantic, in winter, still alive with a deep, unspoken care. "Luke," she said, her voice trembling but clear enough for the room to hear, "I owe you more than words can repay." He inclined his head slightly, waiting. "I thought for years that you didn't fight for us because you didn't love me enough," she continued. "But today, I understand that you loved me so much. You tried to give me a life you thought I wanted, even if it meant losing me." Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't look away. "I'm sorry for not seeing the strength behind your silence. Sorry for letting pride and fear drive me out that snowy night. I've carried that regret through every board meeting, every late-night success. It never left me." Luke's face softened with a gentle, almost paternal compassion. "Melissa," he said quietly, "I never came here to hear an apology. I didn't come to reopen the past or change your future. I came to stand here as the man I've become, and to let you know that what we shared mattered. It still does in a way that isn't about holding on." His voice, deep and calm, carried across the room like a steady drumbeat. "I didn't come to fight," he added the words, landing with the clarity of a vow. "I came to be seen." The sentence drew a collective breath from the guests. Some closed their eyes. Others nodded as if a personal truth had been spoken on their behalf. Melissa's own breath shuddered. She reached out and placed her hand lightly on Luke's chest, where the outline of his Marine Corps tattoo rested over a heart that had weathered war and loss. "You were always worth seeing," she whispered. Martin Kane stepped forward, then his polished shoes echoing on the marble. For a man used to commanding attention with boardroom speeches, his words were unexpectedly simple. "Melissa," he said, his deep voice steady, "you have every right to this moment." "And Luke," he turned toward the veteran with a small, respectful nod. "You've given us all a lesson in what lasting love looks like." He took a slow breath and addressed the crowd, but his eyes never left Melissa. "Marriage should begin in truth, not pretense. If your heart isn't ready today, I would rather we pause than build on something unfinished." A soft gasp moved through the guests, but no one interrupted. This wasn't scandal. It was something nobler. Melissa's eyes shone with gratitude. "Martin, you are kinder and wiser than I deserve," she said. "I can't in good faith continue this ceremony as planned, not because I wish to return to the past, but because I need to stand in the full light of truth before I make vows that shape a lifetime." Martin's jaw tightened, but not with anger. Instead, he exhaled, releasing pride the way a sailor releases a line. "Then let today be a day of honesty," he said, "and of blessing, whatever form it takes." The guests began to murmur again, not with disapproval, but with something closer to admiration. What had begun as a society wedding was becoming a living parable of courage and integrity. Melissa turned back to Luke, her voice softer now. "I don't know what tomorrow will look like, but I know I want to begin again with myself, with the people I love, with the truth. Not to recreate what we had, but to honor it and to grow from it." Luke nodded, a quiet triumph glowing in his eyes. "That's all I could hope for, that we each live true to who we are now." Kayla, sensing the gentle shift, reached for Melissa's hand. "Would you like to see the dollhouse I made?" she asked shyly. Melissa knelt, her gown pooling like a soft cloud. "I would love that," she said, her smile breaking through tears. Mason Jr. stepped forward with his birdhouse, and soon all 4 children were gathered around her, showing their small treasures. The sight of Melissa laughing through her tears with Luke's children drew more than one misty-eyed reaction from the guests. Kendra Lewis approached with a radiant smile. "This," she said softly to anyone listening, "is the wedding. I'll remember all my life, not for the vows that weren't spoken, but for the truths that were." As the afternoon light began to wane, Melissa addressed the assembled guests. "Friends," she said, her voice regaining a confident warmth today, "was meant to celebrate love. And it still does, just not in the way the program predicted. Instead of a marriage, let's make this a celebration of family forgiveness and new beginnings. Please stay. Eat. Dance. Share stories. Let's turn this into a feast of gratitude." The ballroom erupted in applause, real, joyous, unforced. The string quartet picked up their bows at last and began a gentle waltz. Laughter and conversation filled the space, not as a cover for disappointment, but as a genuine expression of something deeper gained. Luke stood back for a moment, watching Melissa embrace guests and receive blessings. Pride not of ownership but of witness warmed him. This was the Melissa he had always known, brave, compassionate, capable of turning pain into purpose. Laura Mitchell stepped beside him, her presence as steady as ever. "You did what you came to do," she said quietly. Luke smiled, eyes still on Melissa. "We all did, even Martin." Laura followed his gaze to where Martin now spoke kindly with Kendra and a few guests, his posture free of bitterness. "It takes a big soul to stand with such grace," she murmured. Luke nodded. Kindness finds its way home. As evening deepened, Melissa crossed the room and stood with Luke once more. "Thank you," she said, her eyes luminous, "for showing me that love doesn't die, it changes shape, and for reminding me that courage is sometimes as simple as standing still." Luke touched her hand gently. "And thank you for inviting me, even if you weren't sure why. It gave us both a chance to be free." They shared a quiet smile, one that needed no future promise to be complete. When Laura signaled that it was time to gather the children for the return flight, Melissa embraced each child, whispering blessings. Martin approached and shook Luke's hand firmly. "Safe travels, Marine," he said, with a genuine smile. "And thank you for helping all of us see what matters." Luke's answer was simple and heartfelt. Take good care of her. Outside, the cold evening air felt fresh and light. Luke led his children and Laura toward the waiting cars, the laughter from the ballroom following like a benediction. He felt no regret, only a profound peace. He had come not to reclaim the past, but to honor it, and in doing so had helped set many hearts free, including his own. The mission was complete, not with medals or fanfare, but with something far greater: forgiveness and quiet triumph. The winter dusk over Boston deepened into a velvet night as Luke Mason and his small family stepped out of the Kingsley Hotel. The air was cold enough to sting, but Luke felt only a radiant warmth. Behind them, laughter and music from the ballroom floated into the city streets, a soft echo of celebration that no longer belonged to a wedding, but to something larger and deeper. Melissa's final words, "Love doesn't die. It changes shape," still rested in Luke's heart like a quiet benediction. He turned to watch her one last time. Through the tall windows of the ballroom, he saw her laughing with Kendra, and Martin greeting guests with unburdened joy. The sight was not bittersweet. It was whole. She had chosen honesty over appearances, courage over fear. That was the woman he had loved and would always honor. Laura Mitchell came to stand beside him, her breath rising in soft clouds. "Ready to head back to the airport?" she asked. Luke nodded, a gentle smile touching his lips. "Yes." The kids will be asleep before we even take off." Indeed, the children were already yawning. Their earlier excitement softened into drowsy contentment. Mason Jr. carried the small birdhouse Melissa had insisted he keep. Kayla clutched the dollhouse that had earned so many compliments. Liam and Kevin each held a pocketful of cookies offered by wedding guests who had turned into unexpected friends. As they settled into the waiting SUV, Luke took a last, slow look at the hotel's glowing facade. He felt no tug of regret, only gratitude. The mission he had set for himself to be seen, not to fight, had been fulfilled more beautifully than he could have planned. The drive to the private airfield wound along the Charles River, where moonlight shimmered on sheets of ice. The children dozed against each other like a pile of soft quilts, and the vehicle's gentle hum gave Luke space to reflect. 7 years ago, he had walked away from Melissa under a storm of snow, believing he was sparing her a lifetime of disappointment. Tonight, he left Boston under a sky cleared by forgiveness, carrying a family he had built from courage and love. The arc of those years felt like a miracle. What began in loss had blossomed into something far greater than he once dared imagine. Laura broke the silence softly. "You know, Luke, what happened in that ballroom will live in people's hearts for a long time. You gave everyone there a picture of love that lasts beyond circumstance." Luke looked at her with quiet appreciation. "I only told the truth. Exactly," she said, turning to meet his gaze. "And truth is what heals." You reminded them that family isn't a contract, it's a daily choice. He let her words settle. For a man trained to measure success in missions and results, it was still a revelation that the most important victories were often invisible. The nights spent soothing a child's nightmare, the patient hours shaping wood into something useful and beautiful, the quiet insistence on showing up day after day. At the private terminal, the jet waited under a clear, star-strewn sky. The nor'easter that had threatened their journey now seemed a distant memory, replaced by calm air and a sense of providence. The pilot, a cheerful veteran himself, greeted them with a salute. "Perfect night for flying," he said. "Almost feels like someone up there wanted this trip to end well." Luke smiled. "I believe you might be right." Once aboard, the children curled instantly into sleep, their breaths soft and even. Laura settled across from Luke with a blanket over her lap. For a long while, they simply watched the lights of Boston recede beneath them, shrinking to a constellation of quiet memories. Laura finally spoke, her voice low and reflective. "There's something about you, Luke. You carry storms and still walk in peace. People feel that." Luke chuckled softly. "Maybe it's just years of learning that life's hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. It's more than that," she insisted gently. "It's the way you turn pain into purpose. The world needs to see that." He met her eyes, a thoughtful pause stretching between them. In those calm brown depths, he sensed not just partnership, but a kind of companionship that had quietly deepened through every shared mission, every late-night planning session for Hearts Over Horizons. It wasn't romance, not yet, but something steady and promising, like the slow build of dawn. "Whatever the world sees," Luke said, "I'm grateful you've been beside me." Laura's smile was soft and luminous. "And I'm grateful you let me be." The jet touched down in Portland, well after midnight, the Maine coast greeting them with crisp air and a canopy of stars. Luke carried Kayla and Kevin one by one to the SUV, while Mason Jr. and Liam sleepily followed. The drive home was silent except for the occasional sigh of the children and the soft rhythm of tires on frozen road. When they finally arrived, the farmhouse glowed with welcoming warmth. Luke tucked each child into bed, brushing a kiss onto every forehead. Standing for a moment in the quiet of their rooms, he felt the deep satisfaction of a mission fulfilled. They had walked into the past with courage and returned to the present even stronger. Downstairs, Laura waited by the wood stove, 2 mugs of tea steaming on the table. The firelight gilded her face with a quiet beauty that matched the stillness of the hour. "You must be exhausted," she said as he joined her. Luke sat opposite the fire, reflecting in his gray eyes. "Tired? Yes. But peaceful. Tonight feels complete." Laura nodded. It was more than a wedding. It was a reminder of why we do what we do, why we help children, why we build families of choice and love. They sat for a while in companionable silence. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and salt water. Inside, the wood stove crackled like a gentle heartbeat. At last, Laura rose, slipping on her coat. "I should head back before dawn." Luke walked her to the door. The cold air sparkled with a million stars, as if the heavens themselves approved. For a moment they stood side by side, sharing a quiet that needed no words. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Not just for today, for everything. For believing that the life we build every day can change the world." Laura met his eyes, her smile full of quiet strength. "Luke, that's what you teach all of us. Kindness always finds its way home." He watched as her car disappeared down the snowy road, a single pair of tail lights fading into the horizon. The house behind him glowed softly, filled with sleeping children and the promise of a new morning. At sunrise, Luke stood on the porch, the cold air crisp with the smell of wood smoke and ocean salt. The sky blushed with the first streaks of pink and gold. He placed a hand over the Marine Corps emblem on his chest and whispered a prayer of gratitude for Melissa's courage, for Martin's grace, for Laura's steadfast companionship, and for the 4 children who had turned his once broken life into a living cathedral of love. In that still moment, he felt the quiet truth settle like snow. The mission of love is never finished. Tomorrow there would be school runs, woodworking projects, new children to help through Hearts Over Horizons. But the heart of his life family, forged by choice and devotion, was already whole. Behind him, small footsteps padded across the wooden floor. Mason Jr. appeared in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Dad, are we really home?" Luke smiled and lifted his son into a hug. "Yes, buddy." "We're home." Kayla, Kevin, and Liam soon followed, tumbling onto the porch in a burst of laughter. They crowded around their father, pointing at the sunrise. The world was waking, and so were they, ready for the ordinary miracles of a new day. Luke looked at their shining faces and felt a deep, unshakable peace. Yesterday had been about closure and courage. Today was about the endless work of love. Melissa's final words echoed in his mind, like a soft refrain. Kindness always finds its way home. He smiled, holding his children close as the sun climbed higher, lighting the Maine coast with promise. Whatever missions lay ahead, new homes to build, new hearts to heal, he would meet them with the same quiet strength that had carried him through every storm. Because love once awakened never truly ends. It only widens like dawn across a winter sea. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Share a little about your corner of the world in the comments. We truly enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and how they bring people together. If this journey of love and quiet courage touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Soul Moment Stories. Your support helps us keep creating uplifting tales that remind us all of the power of kindness and second chances. From all of us here, thank you for spending this time with us. Your presence means more than words can say, and we look forward to welcoming you back for the next soul-warming story.